You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
Yes?
I don't know. I would.
Oh God, he's so hard to talk to.
Hesitation. This is a long hesitation.
There's so many questions implicit
Should
in this.
the human race survive?
There's so many questions implicit in this. What do you mean by... He's like Jordan Petersoning the question. He's like, what do you mean by humanity? What do you mean by human race? You want them to endure. What do you mean by endure? And what do you mean by human? And what do you mean survive?
Yes.
Okay.
But
But a big but.
I also would I also would like us to radically solve these problems.
And what is that radical problem? It would be, you know, the poor. The poor are the problem. What's the radical solution? Well, exterminating the poor.
Right.
And so, you know, it's always, I don't know,
Yeah, he's like, let me try not to sound like a monster. I hear that he like gets blood transfusions from like younger, like he's like quite literally sucking the blood of youth like a vampire, you know, trying to hold on to his own personal eternity, which is, I mean, all the richest people are so out of touch and they all want to live forever and they all hate their lives.
you know, yeah, transhumanism is this, you know, the ideal is this
Scourge.
radical transformation where your human natural body gets transformed into an immortal body.
Was I not just talking about this? And I swear to God, I have not seen this clip, but they all obsess over living forever.
And there's a critique of, let's say,
This guy's not buying it. He's like, look, I've lost way too much hair to listen to this nonsense. I've seen too many things, okay? I've seen hair fall out of my head, and I can't go back.
trans people in a sexual context, or I don't know, transvestite is someone who changes their clothes and cross dresses. And
What is he talking about? We're talking, do you want humanity to endure? And now you're talking about how on Saturday night, Peter Thiel gets all liquored up, puts on his high heels and a nice skirt, dolls himself up with some makeup, and he goes down to all the gay bars and lives it up and chats it up with the boys. What is he projecting right now, in other words? Why is he talking about transsexuals and describing transsexual? Why is that so important? The question was, would you like humanity to endure?
a transsexual is someone where you change your penis into a vagina, and we can then debate how well those surgeries work. But we want more transformation than that. The critique is not that it's weird and unnatural.
It's not the penis into the vagina. It's the penis into the heart of the vagina is the real point.
Man, it's so pathetically little. And
Oh, now he's describing his penis. It's so pathetically little.
okay, we want more than cross-dressing or changing your sex organs. We want you to be able to change your heart.
What the f***? I feel like he's beyond parody. I'm trying to parody what he says, and then he goes and says the thing that I used as parody, as satire. This makes utterly no sense.
And change your mind and change your whole body. And then Orthodox Christianity, by the way.
Now he's talking about Orthodox Christianity. This guy, he's got so much brain rot. It's quite appalling.
The critique Orthodox Christianity has of this is these things don't go far enough. Like that transhumanism is just changing your body, but you also need to transform your soul. You need to transform your whole self.
Why does this guy have the nuclear codes again?
And so,
Right, but
This guy is making billions of dollars off of the blood of Palestinian children right now. And listen to these quacky, like crazed sociopaths talk. And they have all of the institutional strength to leverage in our society. And this is what their personal ideologies are. That is scary. I mean, I think everything that he's saying is obviously bullshit. And I'm not scared of someone like Peter Thiel, but it's like, whoa, like I can't believe he's the head of Palantir, basically. He looks like he drinks his own pee. He looks like there's a lot going on here.
Wait. I generally agree with what I think is your belief.
Yeah, because he's really trying to get, he's talking to Peter Thiel, right? He's like, I'm trying to get there with you, Peter. Your mental gymnastics.
That religion should be a friend to science and ideas of scientific progress. I think any idea of divine providence has to encompass the fact that we have progressed and achieved and done things that would have been unimaginable to our ancestors. But it still also seems like, yeah, the promise of Christianity in the end is you get the perfected body and the perfected soul through God's grace.
It's one of those things that, like, you know, I see the language that Peter Thiel is embodying right now to describe his ideology is not really different from the Tsar of Russia in 1917, who tried to justify his position of power, his position of economic and political power, through spiritual ideology, through religious ideology, because he was so untethered to the actual material conditions of our society. And for him to keep it going, he had to adopt, Rasputin. He had to give way to like this religious fantasy, because if he had to actually acknowledge the material conditions, that would spell a death sentence for his rule, for his reign. And in much the same way, I feel like Peter Thiel, and people like him, they have to fantasize about some ideology, and it usually has to do with religion or religious based. It has to delve into some idealistic, non-material view of the world, because if he were to actually contend with what the material conditions of the world actually are and his responsibility for them, he would thus be acknowledging the end of his power. So does that make sense? It's really when it's such a red flag when I hear powerful people start talking about religion. It's a way to placate the masses, Religion is the way to inoculate the masses, make them okay with having nothing by promising them some future after they die where they will have everything. Anyway, I'll keep going.
And the person who tries to do it on their own with a bunch of machines is likely to end up as a dystopian character.
Well, let's articulate this.
And you can have a heretical form of Christianity, that says something else.
I don't know. I think the word nature does not occur once in the Old Testament, and so if you and there is a word in which a sense in which
this is painful.
The way I understand,
he's trying to deny scientific laws, trying to deny nature, and reverting back to religious ideology. There is an interesting contradiction that's been playing out throughout human history, which is the contradiction between the ideal and the material. You could also see that contradiction between something like religion and science. Early humans adopted these fantastical religious ideas as a way to contend and explain phenomena that occurred in nature that they could not explain. They didn't have the science and the knowledge for. But over time, science has become a way of rationalizing humans. And as you rationalize, you attribute less power of, attribute less relevance and less power to religion and religious ideology. And yet religion has still persisted, which is kind of a paradox, because you would think that as humans became more knowledgeable, their use for religion would be less and less. But that's part of the ruling class tactic to always deny nature, deny that there are natural laws, and adopt religious idealism, which is static. Another way of thinking about this is that people like Peter Thiel will tell you that history is static and unchanging. It's always been the same. We can see that in Elon Musk. He tells us, basically people have been killing each other for all the live long day. So we're going to keep, that's going to serve as the justification for me not caring what happens now. But these are ahistorical observations. And, the reason that they want to pretend like history is stagnant and static is because, like I said, if they start to acknowledge that things are born, they evolve, and they die, they also simultaneously spell a death sentence for their own power and a death sentence for capitalism. So historically speaking, as far as political economies are involved, they, once again, born, evolve, and they die. And once you recognize that capitalism will die, then if you're a capitalist, that's not very lucrative of an idea to pursue, right? So it's best to hang on to like religious ideology because it's static, it doesn't change. What was that line that the ruling class nature is to deny? I'm just saying that they reject materialism, and that's because that would be an acknowledgement of the end of their power, because materialism obviously contends that history is anything but static. It is a dynamic process, and one filled and ripe with contradictions and everything, and everything in nature and everything in every object that has a physical existence contains contradictions which drive its development. And that being said, you know, the same is true for political economies. The same is true for society itself, you know, and that means that, you know, for capitalism, for instance, there's a class contradiction. And as we know, with every society, with every economic mode of production, it eventually gets outmoded. And revolutions occur because they represent a proliferation quantitatively of commodities. There's always an increase in economic production that accompany a revolution, and there is a general overthrow. And the revolutions are characterized by the overthrow of the oppressive class. The power structure is upended. They become the opposite of their function. So, you know, getting back to that idea that objects have contradictions that drive its development, the one can become the other. The one can become the opposite of itself. So in the case of capitalism, the ruling class would become goes from the ruling class, from the oppressive class, to the oppressed, and that's always been the case with revolutions. They represent a changing of the guard, if you will, a changing of the hierarchy. And you know, before it was the feudal system, and you had the rise of this separate class, the merchant and manufacturing class, which eventually were able to overthrow the landlord, the landed aristocracy, as they say. And you know, now what has been inherited is that the capitalist class has become much like the landed aristocracy was at the end of feudalism. They became the reactionary class, and it's up to the working class to overthrow the reactionary ruling class. That's where it falls. That's the next stage of historical development. That goes back to it ties back into my idea of, not my idea, but the idea of materialism, and the view of history, historical materialism, as being basically a process by which quantitative changes eventually produce a qualitative shift in societies.
The Judeo-Christian inspiration is about transcending nature. It is about overcoming things, and the closest thing you can say to nature is that people are fallen.
The closest thing you can say to nature is that people are fallen. So, again, tying nature into some religious concept. And that's the natural thing in a Christian sense,
that's
he says.
The natural thing in a Christian sense is that you're messed up. And that's true. But, there's some ways that, with God's help, you are supposed to transcend that and overcome that.
With God's help, again, trying to conflate nature with religion and get you to adopt a static, unchanging, ahistorical worldview, so as to say that Peter Thiel's power was just a law of nature itself.
Very creepy, very scary. That Peter Thiel guy is very creepy, he's very scary.